Yes, I'm counting this in Kingdom. I know it's made for Legacy, and it was moved into Kingdom, so it could be released like a whole single day early, considering they hit shelves at almost the exact same time, but it came in a Kingdom box. Not like that's going to matter later. But it came in the box, and if I don't count it like that, then the final wave of Kingdom has 2 figures in it, arguably 1. And that's just beyond the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So I'm counting it here, and boy, if I reviewed this last, Kingdom would just be going out on the worst note possible. It's Kingdom Hotrod, the newest addition to the remarkably stellar core class line. So far, the most meh figure from the whole class has been Vertebrake, who's honestly a good figure, so Hotrod seems to be looking hopeful. And this thing is just hideous. This looks like Hotrod, drawn from hazy memory, clouded by time, by a person who only ever saw him once while they were drunk. So it looks like him if you squint real hard. But then he's got the worst, most awful, baffling case of proportions I've ever seen. Shins are way too big, thighs are way too small, waist is way too narrow, chest seems about the size it should be, head is tiny, arms are bracketed off the body on some extreme bean poles, shoulders are way too long, forearms are way too short, and he's got a big ugly placard taped to his back, as well as some connecting struts on the ends of his fists, and just all the kibble in the world hanging off the backs of his ankles. Normally, I'm not at a loss for bad things to say about a figure, but there's nothing good about this, so why should I say anything? I can point at any part of this figure and just say, that's bad, and be right about it. This is hands down the worst core class figure they've ever released. It is shocking. Everyone so far, with the exception of Vertebrake, who didn't have a character they were based on, had so few compromises to their designs, they looked almost perfect. Megatron had some wrist kibble and epaulettes, Rat Trap had a serious lack of paint, Starscream had a nose cone on his back and null rays that fall off, and Soundwave had nothing. He was perfect. But this also has nothing, though in a different way, because there's nothing that looks right. And they stole my logo to use as a collar piece. He doesn't even hold well. His legs are floppy as shit, in 2 directions no less. I cannot stress this enough, there are no tabs holding the legs in their proper orientation. It's not that they are too small or too weak, they don't exist, period. Kingdom has had some trouble remembering to make the tabs large enough to work, but how did you forget to include them altogether? How is this doing nothing right? Okay, that's not fair. Let's give this its 1 point. There's a lot of paint on it, and it uses that like ass. Cause right now, you can look at the robot mode and it seems real plain, but you are failing to notice like a full third of this thing is painted. There's none on the arms from the front, none on the shins, which are both way too long and way too fat, with the leg details barely molded onto them. They've got 2 splotches on the thighs, the face has a tiny amount, and then the chest seems to have his yellow crest and Autobot symbol. If you look at this part from behind, you can see that even internally, it's orange. So the only part that appears to be painted is the yellow, because you wouldn't paint a part internally. That's just a waste of budget. Except I chipped away at the back of the other side, and yes, this whole part is actually red. So not only was this cast in the wrong color and needed to be painted, but they also painted this much more than they had to, wasting the budget, and then they didn't do anything about the boring beyond belief shins. The spoiler, which is also a part you'd think would just be cast in yellow, is also 100% painted. At least this makes some idiot sense, because the spoiler is actually a separate accessory, which you can choose to remove, and during the process, you can really see how far his shoulders are away from his body without it blended by the silhouette of the spoiler. I cannot overstate just how awful that looks. And you can take the spoiler and attach it to a specifically included port on the other side, which serves no function other than to make the figure uglier, and I guess be more G1 accurate because the spoiler is supposed to be in this orientation. But it puts this large, hideous gap here, and it sure lets you see from behind just how much of a no-thoughts, head-empty boy Hotrod is. And yes, I know I've used that joke before, but it bears repeating. His head is completely vacant. Most of the core class figures had some level of hole back there, but this is the first figure of any of them that looked like they were hollowed out with an ice cream scoop. And weirdly enough, he has ports all over his back the accessory can plug into, but that's dumb. Head sculpt is not good. Somehow they've taken Hotrod and made him look incredibly generic. He looks weird and dweeby, his ear cups stick out way too far, his neck is too skinny, it utterly fails to capture the essence of the character, and if you turn it too far, you see that his head is not only empty, but flat as well. Mine has this little paint mishap over his eye. That's whatever. This whole thing is so ugly I can't bring myself to care, and yours won't have this problem if you don't heed my advice and choose to get him anyways. So yeah, this thing is just balls ugly. I am shocked by how bad this looks, and how I didn't realize it was going to be this wretched until I got it in hand. There is something so very wrong here with this guy. Something truly, remarkably awful. Everything about what I'm looking at is screaming to me that this is not a core class figure, but a Legends figure from 2014 or earlier that just didn't pan out, so they held onto it for almost a decade, and only now they decided to release it because they got sick of waiting. Which, let's be clear, there is absolutely precedence of them doing that. Kingdom Huffer was an unreleased, decade-old design as well. So this looks horrendous, and obviously the accessories are not going to save him. He seemingly only comes with one, it's actually 2. For one, you get his sword. This is bigger and looks better than I thought it was going to, but the handle for holding it is way too low, and this still is way too small to be anything other than a knife to a deluxe figure, so it always looks awkward and is of limited use. Then you can remove his spoiler and use this tiny peg on top of it to attach it to Hot Rod's hand, giving him something of a gun. And you can take his sword and peg it into the front, and now it's kind of like a bow and arrow, which is something Hot Rod is sometimes known to use. So the accessories are fine, but this thing didn't need fine accessories, it needed a miracle, and it didn't get one, especially not in the posing. We are already shaky looking at the rest of this figure, but the posing is awful. This is easily the worst of the core class figures on this front, and one of the worst figures to come out since Combiner Wars. And Combiners tend to pose better. Head only swivels. I am dubbing this type of shoulder movement Hot Rod shoulders, or maybe Rodimus shoulders. Before we actually get to the shoulders, the arms have about 20 degrees of movement, then you hit the ratchets, which only have 2 detents, and these are the Hot Rod shoulders, where they come up over his head. I swear all his figures do this, and they still don't get out 90 degrees to the side. Normal 90 elbows, no hands, no waist, legs are refreshingly only slightly impeded out to the side and nowhere else, normal 90 knees, and nothing else. You can kind of fake an ankle pivot at the top of the knee, otherwise you are missing 3 bread and butter joints with everything that's left except for the thighs having significantly less range than normal. So this is unbelievably terrible posing for the modern age. Every Beast Wars reissue figure I've reviewed that was designed back in like 1994, almost 30 years ago, is better on this front, and the transformation does not help this figure at all. First up, this transforms exactly as I predicted, and at the same time, not at all, because I didn't think it would actually be this fiddly and annoying. Nothing on this likes doing what it's supposed to. Everything is constantly trying to come apart, it fights you at every step of the process, and the back section is the worst of it, with these tabs that need to sandwich between the legs, but the 2 legs are not designed to let that part pass, so you have to mash it and mosh it to squeeze it in, and the Play-Doh factor is off the charts, and it's a Legends core class figure where I look at it and just think to myself, oh, not fucking today, when I consider transforming it. There are way bigger, vastly more complex figures I will gladly transform anytime instead of this. And the alt mode is off. It's very off. There's something not right about any part of this. For starters, it's missing the Autobot symbol on the hood, so that looks plain like no one's business, but then you've got the window, which was painted in gray when it's supposed to be dark blue. It's not done in clear plastic, which I'm sure relieves a lot of you, but it's so flimsy anyways, I still expect this to break every time I use it. And these parts should either be a lot thinner or completely non-existent. Mine has another paint mishap on the exhaust pipes here, where the paint both gets kind of fuzzy, and then there's this big streak running up onto the body. This is a lot more pronounced than the previous problem, and it makes me think they just didn't give a damn while making these, considering mine has so many QC problems. The general shape of this also doesn't remind me of Hot Rod. It more looks like a regular car that someone stuck bits onto to make it look like Hot Rod. At best, it looks kind of like the Titan's Return version with these unfinished struts jumping up to meet the spoiler, yet more evidence that this is a much older figure just being released now. There's like a gap under the window. The only good feature this mode has is that it rolls okay. I've seen much better and I've seen much worse, and this is its best feature. Well, that, and you can make a jousting mode that would never work, or a slightly worse jousting mode that would never work. Why is this possible? So this alt mode kind of sucks. It looks wrong, it's bland, it's painted both sloppy and incorrect, and there's nothing remarkable about it other than it feels like a great value Hot Rod. And at the end of it all, there is nothing good about this thing. This is a figure that does nothing, literally nothing well, unless you count well as doing everything well below average. Hell, the only thing this doesn't do terribly at is accessories, which are fine. Its best feature is one that doesn't matter and is fine. Its best feature is fine. Everything else is so far below what we should expect that each facet of this figure is enough to compel me to recommend you avoid this thing. The robot mode is awful, it's hideous, it's wrong, it's built like crap with terrible QC and proportions that only make it worse when you pose, which you can't do because the posing is decades out of date. The transformation sucks, it shouldn't be as unpleasant as it is, it's stupid simple, and yet it finds a way to be miserable. And the alt mode is not offensively bad, I guess? It's bad, it's just not savagely beating you over the head with how terrible it is. Seriously, this does not feel like a modern figure in any way, and if it turns out this was designed recently, I'd be at a complete loss. This is quite likely the worst thing I've ever covered on this channel, and it's not even funny bad like the Takara Diatlas, it's just in every way lame. It's pulling a 3 out of 10 on all categories. This isn't even a good gift for little kids who'd be happy with anything. The transformation is too frustrating for them to enjoy, and it feels fragile to boot. A bag of candy would bring whoever gets it a longer lasting period of joy than this thing ever will. Avoid this thing, because it's a micro masterpiece at sucking. And it's not even in an entertaining way. It is an insult upon the name core class. And that's not half what I have to say, but it's enough what I have to say. And I know, you know, what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So, if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please, share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.